$400 billion and controlled by a man almost no one today has heard of. Not a king, not a pope, a banker. A German cloth merchant's son who at his peak commanded around 2% of all European GDP and casually bought himself a Holy Roman Emperor. But here's the twist. The same money that crowned emperors also helped trigger the Protestant Reformation and 500 years of religious conflict. A devout Catholic banker accidentally lit the fuse that blew his own church apart. How did that happen? How did a boy from a family of weavers become the secret owner of kings, the silent partner of popes, and the landlord of the poorest people in his hometown? And underneath all the golden glory, what invisible debt was slowly piling up, economic, political, even spiritual, that would eventually drag down his banking empire? Stay with this story and you'll follow the money trail from a weaver's shop to imperial thrones. Watch a single indulgence scheme explode into the Reformation. See how a banker bought an emperor and end in a quiet housing complex where his legacy still charges less than €1 a year. Picture Europe in the mid-1400s. Power isn't numbers on a screen. It's land, armor, bloodlines, and blessings from Rome. In Augsburg, a free imperial city, a weaver named Hans Fugger is just trying to sell cloth. Over generations, his family climbs into the merchant class. Comfortable, not legendary. When Jakob is born in 1459, he's one more son in a house of textile traders, initially steered toward the church. Then his father dies. The family business is exposed. His mother makes a decision that looks small but will rewrite European history. She sends teenage Jakob to Venice. Now imagine Venice in the 1470s. Forests of masts, spice-laden air, marble facades along the Grand Canal. At the Fondaco dei Tedeschi, the German merchant's house, Jakob learns the language that will rule the next age. Double-entry bookkeeping. Instead of scattered tallies, Venetians track every transaction as paired entries, debits, and credits. A merchant can see a balance sheet, what he owns, what he owes in one glance. It's X-ray vision for money in a world where most princes are basically guessing. Jakob masters this new math, plus currencies, bills of exchange, and a hard lesson. Information is money. Early news of a lost ship, a failed harvest, a royal death can be traded like any commodity. By the time he trudges back to Augsburg in the 1480s, he's not just a cloth dealer's heir. He's carrying the operating system of modern capitalism in his head, and he's about to meet his first desperate prince. In 1487, Archduke Sigismund of Tyrol has a problem. He's blown through his funds and picked fights he can't afford. He needs cash. Most bankers avoid him. Fugger looks past the man and stares at the mountain. Under Sigismund's feet lie the silver mines of Schwaz, rivers of ore. So Jakob offers what looks like salvation, thousands of florins in loans. In return, he doesn't demand castles. He demands the right to buy silver from those mines at fixed, discounted prices. If Sigismund needs more money, he'll be back. Each new loan means more mining rights, deeper dependency. If he defaults, the Fuggers don't just lose a client. They gain the engine that prints his wealth. Within a few years, that bet pays off. Schwaz explodes into the mining metropolis of Europe. Tens of thousands of miners and smelters descend on the region. Hundreds of kilometers of tunnels snake under the mountain. The town above becomes one of the largest in the Habsburg lands, built on Fugger-financed metal. And when Sigismund steps aside, his young Habsburg relative Maximilian inherits both the mines and the debts. The Fuggers are suddenly not just rich merchants, they're financiers to the man who will soon be Holy Roman Emperor. Jakob understands opportunity. He doesn't just skim a little from the top, he builds an industrial machine. He finances the pumps that drain deep shafts, the power systems that carry energy from distant streams, and new smelters that strip silver from copper, or others consider waste. He owns the mine's inputs, the refining, the warehouses, and the trade routes that carry metal to Venice, Antwerp, and Lisbon. Vertical integration, centuries before anyone calls it that. By the early 1500s, roughly half the silver and copper produced in the Holy Roman Empire passes through Fugger hands. Copper bars stamped in Tyrol set prices across Europe. Silver becomes coins, chalices, cannon. On the ledgers, the numbers sing. Underground, the music is different. Miners work by lamplight in cramped, wet tunnels, breathing dust that eats their lungs. Accidents, floods, cave-ins are constant threats. And above ground, the Fuggers control the company stores that sell food, tools, and clothing. Wages go out on payday. Much of it comes straight back as inflated prices at Fugger-owned shops. Many miners end each month owing the same men who sign their pay envelopes. Already you can see the invisible debt building, not just in florins on parchment, but in anger and dependence. Meanwhile, Maximilian Thurnern, the last knight, leans harder on Jakob's credit. He dreams of Italian campaigns and heroic crusades. What he lacks is discipline with money. He borrows for everything: battles, banquets, pageants. Each new conflict drains his treasury. Each shortfall sends messengers to Augsburg. In return for cash, he grants the Fuggers monopolies and titles, lifting them into the nobility and placing them under imperial protection. On paper, he is emperor by the grace of God. In practice, many of his future revenues are already pre-spent to his banker. While Jakob quietly consolidates metal and monarchs, a different client appears: the Pope. Around 1500, the Vatican is facing a monumental building project. St. Peter's Basilica is crumbling. Popes Julius II and then Leo X want a church that will awe the world: marble, frescoes, soaring domes. There's just one problem. The papal coffers are nearly empty, and Pope Leo X lives expensively. Think extravagant banquets and lavish patronage, a lifestyle more princely than priestly. The Medici Bank that once dominated papal finance is fading. Italian houses are tangled in wars. So Rome looks north, to the disciplined ledgers of Augsburg. Jakob Fugger extends huge loans to the Vatican. German capital will rebuild the heart of Catholicism. But Leo cannot cover these debts with ordinary income. So he turns to a tool that already exists, but scales it into a system: indulgences. In church teaching, an indulgence remits the temporal punishment due for sins already forgiven, shortening time in purgatory. In everyday practice by 1500, it often looks like this: donate money, receive a certificate promising spiritual benefit for you or a loved one. Enter Albrecht of Brandenburg, a young prince already holding 2 bishoprics. He wants Mainz, the most powerful archdiocese in Germany, with an elector's vote. Church law frowns on stacking offices, but the Pope is open to persuasion. For a price, Albrecht doesn't have the cash. Fugger does. Jakob lends him the money to buy his own archbishopric. The funds go to Rome. Camille. In return, Leo VI grants Albrecht the right to preach a special indulgence across his territories to pay the debt. Half of every indulgence coin will support St. Peter's. The other half will service Albrecht's loan to Fugger. Can Tetzel, the charismatic Dominican preacher, hits the road with rolling speeches about souls springing from purgatory as soon as the coin in the coffer rings. But beside him travels a quieter figure, a Fugger agent. The indulgence chest has 3 locks: one key for Albrecht's man, one for Rome's, one for Jakob's. When the chest is opened, the Fugger representative takes his share immediately. It's meticulous, almost mechanical. This is where theology meets structured finance. Spiritual anxiety is turned into a revenue stream, monitored with accounting precision. The debts are mounting everywhere now. Albrecht owes Fugger. The Pope owes Fugger. The Church owes the faithful honesty. Then in Wittenberg, a monk reaches his limit. Martin Luther watches parishioners arrive clutching indulgence slips, convinced a payment has purchased their relative's salvation. To him, it's a grotesque distortion of the gospel. To many German nobles, it's also a financial insult. German money funneled south to Rome in Augsburg. On October 31st, 1517, Luther publishes 95 theses against the abuse of indulgences. The printing press blasts them across Europe. Nobody in Augsburg or Rome saw this coming. An obscure Augustinian monk, furious at a particular indulgence campaign crafted to fund a Fugger loan, ignites a movement that fractures Christendom. This is the Black Swan, a niche financial fix, colliding with conscience and technology, shattering trust in the old religious and economic order. As that storm gathers, another crisis arrives. Who will wear the imperial crown after Maximilian's death? In January 1518, the Holy Roman Emperor dies. His grandson Charles, already King of Spain and Lord of the Netherlands, wants the job. So does Francis I of France. The electors know they're deciding the balance of power for a continent. The election becomes a naked auction. Francis offers cash, pensions, and lands. Charles hesitates until his advisors explain, if a French king becomes emperor, Habsburg lands could be squeezed from two sides. So Charles goes where everyone goes when the numbers don't add up. To Jakob Fugger or Mainz, Jakob orchestrates a massive financing operation. He raises more than 850,000 florins to fund the campaign, personally underwriting roughly 2/3. He pulls capital from branches in Antwerp, Venice, and Rome, and coordinates with other bankers, but he's in charge. He studies the electors' loyalties and fears. Who's wavering? Who's leaning French? Who just wants more gold? Payouts are carefully calibrated, promises of titles, loans that will never really be collected. Straight cash, sometimes structured to be payable only if Charles wins. On June 28, 1519, the votes are cast. Charles is elected unanimously as Emperor Charles V. Guns fire, bells ring, priests proclaim it the will of God. Everyone also understands another truth. A banker in Augsburg has effectively bought the imperial title. Charles now sits atop a colossal composite monarchy. Spain, the Netherlands, Austria, parts of Italy, vast new American territories. But he begins his reign owing more money to a private firm than many kingdoms earn in a year. For a time, the relationship holds. Charmaine, in gratitude and necessity, Charles grants the Fuggers plum assets, including the lease on the mercury mines at Almaden. Mercury is crucial for refining New World silver. Controlling Almaden means taking a sliver off every bar that crosses the Atlantic. Yet wars are relentless. Charles fights France, confronts the Ottoman advance, and battles Protestant princes in Germany, trying to break imperial control. Armies have to be paid, fortresses built, fleets supplied. The imperial treasury strains and buckles. Old loans to Fugger come due. New ones are requested. By 1523, Jakob has had enough of delays. He writes a letter to the most powerful man in Christendom, and it reads less like a petition than a demand note. He reminds Charles bluntly that without Fugger funds, he would never have been elected. He states he could have backed France instead. He says he can prove it with written evidence from the emperor's own agents. And then he instructs Charles to have the sums he's owed, plus interest, calculated and paid without further delay. No pious flourishes, just facts and a command. Charles cannot punish him. He needs him. To appease his greatest creditor, he grants more concessions, including expanded control over key Spanish revenues and that crucial mercury supply. On the surface, God's chosen emperor rules by divine right. Underneath, the true leverage lies with a banker holding stacks of royal IOUs. But even the mightiest banker cannot escape when his biggest client hits the wall. Makonon. Jakob dies in 1525, leaving a fortune and a machine that seems unstoppable. His nephew Anton steps in and, by the mid-1540s, pushes the firm to its absolute peak, controlling mines, trade routes, and assets worth over 5 million guilders. Yet the structural problem hasn't changed. The Habsburgs, especially in Spain, keep borrowing against tomorrows that never fully arrive. American silver pours into Europe, fueling inflation. The value of fixed payments erodes while the scale of war spending only grows. The crown refinances old debts with new ones, shuffling obligations from ledger to ledger. In 1557, Philip II of Spain finally does the one thing every creditor fears most. He declares a suspension of payments, a royal bankruptcy. Fugger and other great banking houses take heavy hits. Some recover partially. But the illusion that lending to monarchs is ultimately safe dies a little more with each default. In 1557, again in 1575, and 1607. The merchant banker who once treated emperors like clients discovers there's one power he can't fully control: a sovereign's decision not to pay. Over the following decades, the Fugger firm gradually retreats from the riskier heights of sovereign finance. It leans more into land, noble status, and local influence. The age when an Augsburg banker could quietly dictate European politics fades. Yet one piece of Jakob's design is still working exactly as intended. In 1516, amid all the loans, mines, and imperial intrigues, he starts building the Fuggerei, a housing complex for the deserving poor of Augsburg. Walk through its gates today, and you step into another century. Rows of modest yellow houses line narrow streets. A church tower rises above tiled rooftops. It feels like a village carved out of time in the middle of a modern city. When it opened, the Fuggerei offered dozens of simple, self-contained homes, kitchen, parlor, bedroom, some storage, to citizens who had fallen into poverty through illness or bad luck. To qualify, you needed to be Catholic, an Augsburg resident, and willing to work. The rent was set in the founding charter, 1 Rhenish guilder per year. Today, that's 0.88 euros. The number has never changed, but the real payment is spiritual. Every resident agrees to say 3 prayers daily for Jakob Fugger and his family. An Our Father, a Hail Mary, and a creed. In effect, Jacob builds a perpetual engine of intercession. He invests a capital sum to create and endow the complex. The estate's returns cover maintenance. In exchange, generation after generation of grateful residents whisper his name in prayer. It's philanthropy, public relations, and spiritual hedging all at once. The Fuggerei survives fires, plagues, and bombing raids in World War II. It's rebuilt where destroyed. It adapts to modern life with water, electricity, and television, but the rules and the rent remain. Today it houses around 150 people for less than €1 a year. The gates still close at night. The waiting list is long. Elsewhere, the Fugger family itself endures. Different branches hold princely titles, forests, and a modern private bank. Tourists walk through Schwarz's mine tunnels and the quiet alleys of the Fuggerei, often without realizing they are walking through the footprint of a man whose adjusted fortune rivaled Rockefeller's. His story brings us back to the 3 questions we started with. Who had the money? On the surface, kings, emperors, and popes. In reality, a merchant family in Augsburg, armed with double-entry books and mining contracts. What was the invisible debt? Not just the mountains of florins owed by princes and popes, but the dependence of rulers on private credit, the resentment of workers trapped in company systems, and a church spending its moral authority to service loans. And the Black Swan? A specific indulgence campaign engineered to pay back a Fugger loan that clashed with a monk's conscience and a printing press and shattered centuries of trust in the old order. Jakob Fugger showed how concentrated capital can bend politics, religion, and war. He proved that with ledgers, mines, and nerve, a banker could own kings. But his story also shows the limits of money. An emperor's promise can evaporate with a signature. A church's credibility can crack overnight. A monk's hammer on a church door can undo the cleanest financial plan. 500 years later, when we talk about billionaires swaying elections and shaping public life, we're living in a world Jakob Fugger helped invent. A weaver's grandson who bought an empire. A Catholic banker whose money helped fracture Christianity. And a man who tried, in stone, silver, and whispered prayers, to balance his own ledger with history and with God.